Nobody buys high-end mini PCs for gaming. They're a convenient portable workstation for people with limited space or zero tolerance for PC building, and any gaming done on them is probably going to be limited to quick, lightweight titles on a lunch break. Or perhaps that's other kind of gaming that's, we're not supposed to talk about. The GMKTec EVO-T1 is ideal for these use cases, with an Ultra 9 285H that's capable of eating CAD software, Premiere, Photoshop and Excel for breakfast, but it's also got this little port on the back. Just in case. If you've not heard of Oculink before, it's essentially a neater, more formalised version of an M.2 to PCIe slot adapter. Of all the ways one can plug a big old graphics card into a teeny tiny mini PC, short of a couple of oddball proprietary options, Oculink is currently the gold standard, offering 4 lanes of Gen 4 PCI Express bandwidth, which admittedly is a fair way short of the maximum possible 16 lanes, but it's about as good as we're gonna get until Thunderbolt 5 becomes mainstream. Oculink docks are available from several manufacturers, or can be bodged together with an adapter and powered with a conventional PC power supply, which is the option I've gone for because I'm too cheap to buy a real dock and nobody sent me a free one yet. Hint hint. You can add Oculink to any mini PC or laptop with a spare M.2 slot using an adapter, but making it work as neatly as it does with the EVO-T1 means modding your device's chassis, which isn't in everyone's skill set or comfort zone. I've shown in the past that even a budget GPU can help give a basic mini PC some gaming chops, but this is far from a basic mini PC. The EVO-T1 comes loaded as standard with an Ultra 9, what Intel would once have called an i9. The 285H is a 16-core CPU, 6 of which are full performance cores with a boost frequency of up to 5.4 GHz, and it's built on the recent Arrow Lake architecture, so it should be a pretty snappy performer. Not only does it already have some decent integrated graphics in the form of the Arc 140Ti GPU, but it also has enough horsepower to theoretically drive a fairly substantial discrete graphics card. To that end, I've wired up my PCIe to Oculink adapter and an old 750W EVGA power supply to a Radeon RX 7900 XT, the most powerful GPU I own. But far from the most powerful you can buy. I've tested most of the games in this video at very high or ultra settings, as is befitting for a setup of this price point, but the limiting factors are going to be the mobile-focused CPU and the Oculink connector. To make sure they are the things being tested and not the graphics card, I'm running at 1080p with a possibly excessive amount of FSR upscaling. Before I get to the gaming tests, however, we need to look at a few synthetic benchmarks. Intel's mobile chips historically have run hot and been prone to throttling, especially compared to AMD and Apple, and I found that to be true of the 285H the last time I reviewed it. The T1 is a lot bigger than the last mini PC I tested, however, and that extra space seems to include room for better cooling. Temps are far more acceptable under stress, with less throttling and less fan noise. In Cinebench R23, the extra headroom allows the 285H to score over 20,000 points in multi-core testing, a near 20% uplift compared to the smaller, slimmer model I tested before, but with only a nominal increase to single-core performance. Moving to Cinebench 24, the uplift is slightly smaller this time, at around 14%, and the single-core result is a literal dead heat. That single-core score, by the way, is a few points higher than the desktop Ryzen 7000 series chips I've tested this year. Geekbench 6, being a shorter, less intensive benchmark than Cinebench, doesn't favour the GMK machine. In fact, the Geekon model actually scored a couple of points higher in both single and multi-core tests, though for some reason the graphics benchmarks favoured the EVO-T1, as did the machine learning tests. Bear in mind, Geekbench doesn't make use of the NPU, so this is purely CPU and GPU testing. If we were benchmarking the 285H using just the integrated graphics, Apex Legends would turn in under 100 FPS at lowest settings. As it stands, with the eGPU attached, I could crank settings to their maximum and reach a 210 FPS average. The CPU could be the thing holding things back. The engine has a 300 FPS limit, and I'm positive the 7900 XT could hit that limit. Neither the CPU nor GPU are maxed out here, so this might be in part down to the Oculink bottleneck. CS2 was very interesting. The ARC 140T integrated graphics, combined with this 6-core Ultra 9 CPU, is good for about 115 FPS at 1080p low. With the eGPU attached and settings cranked to high, the average only climbs to 133. Now, I know high quality settings aren't essential in this game, though I did really appreciate having shadows enabled on several occasions, but I don't think we'd see any better performance at lower settings. Again, I think Oculink's the bottleneck in this situation. I tested a U9 185H with the GPU connected directly over an X16 slot last year and got over 150 FPS at 1440 very high. Marvel Rivals is far more GPU limited, even at low settings. The iGPU can't hit 60 FPS in the benchmark even with upscaling, whereas the 7900 XT can hit 113 FPS. Which, actually, it's still not all that impressive, but hey, it's Rivals. Star Wars Battlefront 2 has a 200 FPS limit, which there are apparently ways around if you like. I managed to hit that limit at 1080p high with plenty of room to spare, so I could probably have cranked up the resolution to 1440 if I wanted to. Yes, I know this is an 8-year-old game, but I didn't play it at the time because I didn't want to waste my money on a loot box bonanza. Now that EA's given up on it, and a lot of Star Wars fans have been using it to indulge their nostalgia, it's actually kind of fun. Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2 can be heavy on CPUs, and that's clearly a concern here, but I don't think it's the whole story. The first benchmark run suffered some heavy stutters, and after a reboot it saw the same issues. A second run calmed down significantly, though not without one or two hiccups, and the average was just 66 FPS. For context, an i3-12100F with 2 fewer performance cores and 8 fewer threads in total can reach 74 FPS. Baldur's Gate 2 also had some teething troubles when I loaded up the game for the first time, with large sections of scenery taking a ridiculously long time to load in. A reload later, and I managed to get a clean benchmark run at close to 85 FPS. Not a bad result considering, but once again, far behind some older, theoretically weaker desktop chips. Reversing the trend slightly is Hitman 3, which I test with simulation set to best to really punish the CPU. Without ray tracing, the 285H reaches 123 FPS on average, with 1% and 0.1% lows that are actually pretty standard for this title. Things get hairy in some of the more explosive scenes, even on desktop chips. With RT enabled, the average reaches 60 FPS, putting it about 10% ahead of the 12th Gen i3, but 20% behind the i5-12400F. Marvel's Spider-Man 2 averages 100 FPS without ray tracing, which is a pretty healthy result considering some of the performance I've seen in this game, and approaching 80 FPS with ray tracing is virtually unheard of. That being said, the game has been patched recently, so I don't know if this is a really impressive set of results compared to other CPUs, or if Insomniac is finally fixing their game. Finally, a change from my usual testing, The Last of Us Part 2 rather than Part 1. Both are uncommonly demanding on CPUs. We're in a forest, for crying out loud. What the hell are you simulating? Squirrels? At FSR performance, the average is just short of 105 FPS, and while CPU utilization is very high, the GPU is mostly stuck at or close to 99%. Dropping FSR to ultra performance only improves that by 5 frames, showing that the CPU is potentially holding things back, but I suspect the Oculink port might have been partially to blame. All in all then, I'd say that the limitations of Oculink, and to some extent the limitations of the CPU, mean that this is a bit short of what we might call a gaming beast. It's capable, sure, and with the right GPU, it could be achieving 4K with ray tracing at a steady 60 FPS in a lot of modern AAA games. But that's not really the big challenge here. That comes from the high FPS online games and the CPU-intensive titles, and in that regard, I think any mini-PC and eGPU setup is going to be lacking. Maybe Thunderbolt 5 will be the solution to this, maybe not. Maybe the only answer for the super demanding, high refresh rate gamer remains to build a quote-unquote real PC, perhaps using something like the motherboard I talk about in this video on screen now. Thanks for watching, kindly do the usual YouTube things if you feel so inclined, and I'll see you next time.